Greetings. You know that I'm speaking from the deep south, Central Florida. You can get a little bit deeper than that, but not a whole lot deeper. But some of you may have heard the song Dixie, where the singer says, "In Dixieland, where I was born in, early on a frosty morning." Well, that's what we've had here lately. We've had some frosty mornings here. And I know that where many of you are, it perhaps is even a whole lot colder. So we hope that you're surviving the, there's a name that they gave this. I'm trying to remember the name. Cyclone bomb, is that what they call this weather? Cyclone bomb, I think. Anyway, we're grateful that you're able to see us whenever that is. I was doing a Bible study last evening that certain people saw and will see. And I was speaking about many of the countries of Europe. I was speaking about many of the countries of Europe at that time. And I was talking about Switzerland. And one thing I should have mentioned is the tradition they have of a civilian military, of like a militia, where all males traditionally were drafted, conscripted, and the whole country could have become like one vast army should the need have arisen. And then maybe that's one reason the need hasn't arisen. But if you're interested as to why I even bring that up, what the Bible study was about and why I was talking about European nations in a Bible study, you can go to the Congregational Fellowship of God website and check them out on YouTube. And I think you'll have the opportunity to see the study if you want to. It was done last evening, which would have been the evening of January 5th, 2018. Today is on the Roman calendar, January 6th of 2018. And I am still talking about Daniel. I've done 2 parts. I want to do a 3rd part on Daniel's long, illustrious career. Daniel, who, although did not occupy the office of a prophet, was given prophetic visions, and so he is a prophet. Jesus Christ calls him a prophet. So even though he's not in the Hebrew Bible in the prophetic section, but he can be called a prophet. Jesus Christ did that in Matthew 24. In 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, talking about scriptures, it says in verse 16, "All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness." So the scriptures are here to make us better people, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. In other words, we want to leave this world a better place than when we found it. And the Bible tells us how to do that in the best possible way. In order to understand the Bible, sometimes certain technical points need to be brought out. Today I want to help you understand prophecy. We're bringing out a certain technical point and then relating it to the book of Daniel, to Daniel's long, illustrious career. The Bible, when it speaks of prophecy, speaks of prophetic years. For ease of calculation, a prophetic year of 360 days, which is also called a time. And I want to get into that concept of a prophetic year of 360 days. We also have the principle in the Bible of Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6, that in some prophecies it's a day for a year, so that a 360 day year could indicate 360 years in prophecy. And sometimes a prophecy could be dual. There could be a literal fulfillment in literal days, and then a fulfillment in years. I want to first go to the book of Genesis, start at the beginning, and go to 7:11 of Genesis. Noah was involved in the deluge, and he kept a captain's log. And he dated, evidently, according to a 360-day calendar. In Genesis 7:11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, in the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. That was on the 17th day of the 2nd month. So Let's go 5 months later, and we come in Genesis 8 and verse 3, and the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased. 150 days. Then the ark rested, this is in verse 4, in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. I lived in Southern California for a while, and the Armenian community there uses the Mount Ararat as a symbol of that community in many ways, I believe. Anyway, we have here 150 days, which is 5 months. So we have 30-day months. So we have from the 17th day of the 2nd month to the 17th day of the 7th month, we have 150 days or 5 months. And that sets the basis of the prophetic year of 360 days. I want to go now to the end of the story, the book of Revelation. And I begin in the 11th chapter, Revelation 11. So we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but this will be helpful to you when you study prophetic scriptures. Revelation 11, I want to talk about, I'll just start reading it. And then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood saying, "Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it. For it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Now, 42 months would be 3.5 years. And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth." Well, that's interesting. First, we see the figure 42 months, and then we see 1,260 days. Now, if you're dealing with 30-day months, then 42 months would be 1,260 days. Now, let's go to Revelation 12 and verse 6. Speaking about the church which was in the land of Israel initially. You know, it began in the Jewish community, AD 31. The New Testament church I'm referring to now. Verse 6, "Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her for 1,260 days. Once again, we have that figure. But now look in verse 14. Here you have an end time fulfillment, and it's worded differently. This is Revelation 12:14. "But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent." Time, times, and half a time. So 3.5 times, which would seem to be the same as the 42 months or 1,260 days or 3.5 years. It all seems to tie in here. And now let's go to Revelation 13 and verse 5. It talks about this tyrannical power. And in verse 5, "And he was given a mouth, speaking great things." You know, there's going to be this a team, a false, just as there are 2 witnesses, there's going to be a dictator, a tyrant, and a false prophet on the dark side, you could say. And I don't want to be flippant with this. It's going to be horrible, you know, like in the days of Hitler. Anyway, in verse 5, "And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. So once again, you have that figure. So putting all of this data together, it would seem that when you're talking about prophecy, we have the concept of a time, which is a 360-day year. And in the Bible, sometimes we see the expression of 7 times. Now, 7 times would be therefore 7 prophetic years. And if you want to extend that from the point of view of a day for a year, a prophecy could take 2,520 years to be fulfilled. And that, in fact, you'll see has happened. And I don't want to go into all of that today, but I want to go back into the book of Daniel. So let's go to Daniel, and let's notice that he speaks also of weeks, of years, of a day for a year principle. We have in Daniel 9 the famous 70 weeks prophecy. Daniel 9 and verse 24, and this is really talking about a period of 490 years, right? Let me think, 490 years, although it's broken up. Most of them all come all together, but there's a 3.5 year period that comes way later, possibly. Anyway, verse 24, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So this is the background to that prophecy, and I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but it's found in Daniel 9. And what I want to talk about, though, is how it concludes here in verse 27. It says, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week." So after you've had 69 weeks, you come to the 70th week, and it evidently is a period of 7 years. "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week." That would be 7 years. "But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and offering." And so here we have a 7-year period, and it's interrupted. 3.5 years, and then there's a break. And so it may be quite some time till the other 3.5 years are completed. That's one way to look at the verse. Another way to look at the verse would be, "And then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and for half a week he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and offering." In other words, it may have a dual meaning. This prophecy may be referring to Christ and also have a dual meaning, an undercurrent referring to the Antichrist. But in any case, you see how it seems to be talking about a 7-year period and an interruption in that time. Or it may be talking about either an interruption or what's going to be happening for the latter part of that period. So in any case, we do see this principle of a day for a year in prophecy, and it comes out in Daniel. Now, if I keep reading in Daniel, I come to the 12th chapter of Daniel, and here we come to the final climax as history comes to a close, and we have cataclysmic events at the end, and Daniel is to be tied in with Revelation. Daniel 2 ties in with Revelation 17, Daniel 7 ties in with Revelation 13, and here we find a time which is unprecedented, as you read about in other prophecies, but I want to come to the how long it's going to be. Let's go to verse 7. "Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time." So now that you've got the background, you've read other scriptures, and I think you can define that. A time, times, and half a time is a 3.5 year period, and so evidently the most intense tribulation immediately before the coming of Jesus Christ. It's always darkest before the dawn, and so the most intense period of terror will be that final 3.5 years, and if you put all the scriptures together, evidently there's a 2.5 year period where the beast reigns supreme, and then 1 year, which is the beginning of the day of the Lord, and that year involves punishments on that kingdom, that empire, climaxing in the second coming of Christ. So let's continue to read here. "It shall be for a time, times, and half a time, and when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished." So there's going to be, there will become a great revival of God's church, and then a great persecution of God's church before the second coming of Christ. And if you keep reading, you'll see there's other days mentioned here, and these are likely literal days rather than day for a year, although there might be that application as well. But here we have a period with in verse 11 and verse 12, we are tacking 30 days onto the 1260, and then another 45 tacked on So we have the 1260 plus 75 other days, which perhaps will be, preparatory activities right before that 1260-day period. So it all ties in. I know I've thrown a lot of figures out at you, and hopefully you can go back and read the verses, study commentaries, and get a sense of what I'm saying. And you want to be careful about wild speculation. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm actually trying to give you some technical points in order to evaluate what you're reading. I'm not trying to get into wild speculation here, or not even responsible speculation. I'm just wanting to. I guess I did do some of that, but I am trying to help you to understand when you read these prophetic passages what they're talking about. And now I want to focus on something that Daniel did, a wonderful miracle that he performed, that God performed through him, where he interpreted a dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and that dream then becomes a prophecy, an end-time prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled this great empire of Babylon, and if we understand Bible prophecy, we understand that when Jesus Christ returns, he will be opposed by a resurrected Roman Empire. The fourth of the world-ruling empires talked about in Daniel is the Roman Empire, and their 7 resurrections, and in one sense 8, and that final resurrection opposes Jesus Christ. But that final resurrection is also called Babylon the Great in Revelation 18. So the first Babylon, the Neo-Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean Empire, was a prototype of that final empire. And it's that final end-time Babylon. And here Nebuchadnezzar was a prophecy was given to him by Daniel, and it was fulfilled in Nebuchadnezzar's lifetime, in Daniel's lifetime. I want to go to verse 29. Let's go to verse 30. Then the king spoke, this is talking about Nebuchadnezzar, saying, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" So he had quite an ego. And you see at the end of the chapter, he was humbled and he acknowledged God. But it took 7 years of insanity for him to come to that conclusion. Verse 31, while the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. He already heard from Daniel that was going to happen. And they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. Then they shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you. Oh, 7 times. So this would be 2,520 days, 7 prophetic years, 7 times 360. Seven times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Now this was also a foreshadowing of what would occur to this end-time Babylon. That is to say, it would be restrained for 7 times, with a day for a year. In other words, 2,520 years would take place until the restraints are loosed, and this final end-time Babylon can take shape. Let's go to Daniel, the 5th chapter. And here we see the handwriting on the wall, the miraculous handwriting on the wall. And this is where King Belshazzar, a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who did very wickedly, and Daniel prophesied to him. And we have here the fall of Babylon. So we have in verse 25 of Daniel 5, and this is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Now, in America, we say meeny, meeny. When I was a child, we used to have, in order to choose sides in a game, they had this eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and but the point here is that it's, if you're just reading it, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Scholars seem to differ on how to understand this, but it could mean count, weigh, and they divide, or dividers. Now let's take a look at this. In Aramaic, the shin in Hebrew becomes a tav in Aramaic. The sh sound becomes a th sound. It goes from sh to th. But over time, Hebrew speakers lost that th sound and pronounced it as a t. So this tekel is like the Hebrew word shekel, And even today, the Israeli currency is called a shekel, or a weight. If you go to Israel, you spend shekels, shekalim. And so we count, weigh, or counted, weighed, and they divide, or dividers. Now the u here is a way to say and. So you drop that out when you try to interpret the word. And in is a plural ending. So the word is phars, 3 consonants. The Hebrew and Aramaic language are based on a triconsonantal root system, 3-letter roots. And so the root here is P, which is also pronounced PH at times, and then R and S, that's the root. And so that's how it's interpreted later. It's interpreted as Perez, PRS, that's the root. You follow that? The U is and, the IN is plural, so you're left with PH, and the A is a vowel. So the consonants are PH, R, and S, and the PH is also a P. It's pronounced PH after the U sound. Otherwise, it's at the beginning of, otherwise it's P. After certain sounds, it's pronounced as PH, F. Are you okay? You're okay? All right. So now it's interpreted. This is the interpretation of each word. I'll do it in American style. Meaning, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. And it's done twice, dramatically. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And also there's a reference in a way to the Hebrew word kal, possibly the same in Aramaic, which means light. So in other words, you're light. You're not heavy. You don't weigh enough. In other words, you're morally deficient. Perez, breaking, dividing. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. This is another play on words. The word Farsin could mean Persians. Parsim are the Persians. Pras is Persia. And so your kingdom has been given to the Medes and Persians. So there's another play on words here. The word for Persians is implied. In the Bible it says to the Medes and Persia. I believe it says to Madai, the Medes, Ufras, and to Persia. All right, so it's interpreted that way. But there's a secondary meaning here. Babylon fell that very night. Babylon fell that very night, and that was in the autumn of 539 BC. The autumn of 539 BC. And so we have at a period of judgment. The autumn is judgment time, and at that time, Babylon was found wanting spiritually, and that empire came to an end. But let's go back and take a look again at these terms, because most commentators, most scholars say that they are also terms of weight, of metallic weight of coins, of the currency of those days, because the Babylonian Empire was very much an empire that gathered wealth to itself, and the end time Babylon will be very much of a mercenary kind of kingdom. So here we have mina. We have the mina coin, which the gold mina was 50 shekels. So we have mina, and then we have shekel. So if a mina was 50 shekels, we have mina shekel. That's 101 if you look at it in terms of shekels. Are you with me? A mina is 25 shekels. I'm sorry, your mina is 50 shekels. Another mina is 50 shekels, and then 1 shekel. So if you look in terms of shekels, you have here 101, and then you have Perez, half a mina. You could look it up. Perez is half a mina. That's 25 shekels. This is 126 shekels altogether. So if you're looking at this prophecy in terms of shekels, shkalim, and shekel was the basic currency of the Jewish people, of the Israelites as a whole, and later on of Judah, probably, and then even today modern Israel uses the shekel as its currency. So are you with me? We have mina, shekel, Perez, 126 shekels. Now we go to Exodus 3 and verse 13. So back in the book of Exodus, it talks about the valuation of a shekel. Did I say, I'm sorry, 30. Did I say 3? I should have said 30. Okay, Exodus 30. Okay, Exodus 3 is the burning bush episode. Exodus 30 and verse 13. This is what everyone among those who are numbered shall give, half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. A shekel is 20 gerahs. The half shekel shall be an offering to the Eternal. So a gerah is, there are 20 of them to a shekel. Are we okay? There are 20 gerah to a shekel. I want to go now to Numbers 3 and verse 47. Numbers 3 and verse 47. Numbers 3 and verse 47. So here we're talking about numbers and money. So if you're a person who likes figures and statistics, you came to the right place to learn about the Bible today. Anyway, Numbers 3 and verse 47 tells us, you shall take the 5 shekels for each one individually. You shall take them in the currency of the shekel of the sanctuary, the shekel of 20 gerahs. So the shekel is 20 gerahs. Now take 126 times 20. And yes, you come up with 2520. So the numerical value in the gerahs of this particular miraculous revelation here, the handwriting on the wall, the value in gerahs is 2,520. And so we see, in effect, under the surface, that Babylon fell, and now 7 times, as with Nebuchadnezzar, who was the great ruler, who established that dynasty, put his stamp on that dynasty. He was restrained for 7 times, and the dynasty, or the empire, has been restrained for 7 times, 2,520. So 539 in the autumn is when it fell. Now let's go to 1982 in the autumn of 1982. And what's happening there? Well, we have Europe is being restrained. How can Europe really rise and flourish when they're under the shadow of this powerful empire to the east, the Soviet Empire? And this is certainly, keeping Europe from developing its full potential. But things are beginning to happen. We have the election of Margaret Thatcher in the UK. Well, before her, we had the Polish Pope, John Paul II. And then we had Margaret Thatcher in the UK. Then we had Ronald Reagan in the United States. And now, in the autumn of 1982, we have a sudden change in the government of Germany. Suddenly, we have a takeover legally, according to the German Constitution, but in a rather sudden and dramatic way if you study into it. We have the Helmut Kohl of the Christian Democratic Union becoming the new Prime Minister of Germany. And so now there's really a solid front. And 7 years later, in November of 1989, we have the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And so then we have German reunification, we have the crumbling of the Soviet Empire, and now Europe is able to flourish, in a sense, to sort itself out and to really develop as a major world power. Now, that has not happened yet. A lot still has to happen, a lot of ups and downs, but the restraint, in effect, was lifted at that time, but a lot still has to happen. So let's not get hysterical. If you think about what happened to the English-speaking peoples in the beginning of the 19th century, they began to really come into their own collectively as a world power, United States and the British Empire. But it took about a century for the culmination of that power. It was the beginning of the late 19th, early 20th century that we have the English-speaking peoples as the dominant peoples in the world. Now, challenges occurred, through the years, but they overcame all of those challenges. Now, of course, we see that the British Empire has, of course, declined, but America still remains as a great world power to this day, in effect, the superpower of the world. However, in years to come, we're going to see Europe, with all of its ups and downs, eventually sort itself out into another great world-dominating empire. It has yet to happen, but it's going to happen. And unfortunately, that empire will be a negative force. I'm sorry to say that. and it actually will have to be overcome by Jesus Christ when he returns. So I hope that this final look at Daniel, for the time being, part 3 of this series, has been helpful to you, and it will help you to look at trends over the years as we see history unfold. It's not tomorrow, it's not next week, not next year. As I said, it's not no reason for panic or hysteria, but this will just help you understand the long-term trends in history that will be unfolding before our eyes, depending how long we live. And I began this talk by going to the ministry of the two witnesses, the 1260-day ministry. Look how it ends. And how it ends shows you how history is going to climax. It shows you how all these things will finally come to a head and how it's all going to work out. In other words, the end of the story is already written. And if you're a member of God's church, you can say, I've read the end of the book, and we win. Revelation 11 and verse 15. This is after the martyrdom and then resurrection of the two witnesses. Then the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. This is where history is going, and I hope and pray that's where we're going to be a part of that ultimate triumph. All the best to you and yours.